What does continuous improvement, diversity, equity, and inclusion have in common? Well, you put them together and you get marvelous wow teams. My guest, Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, he shares how a conversation with his 4-year-old daughter changed the trajectory of his purpose in life. You're going to hear from Dr. Jeffrey about how he opens doors for others because he sees that as his purpose. Join me as I talk to Dr. Jeffrey about how continuous improvement and diversity, equity, inclusion come together to create a culture of continuous improvement.
One of the things that I came to appreciate is even as I have been more, felt like I've been more included as I've navigated my time here in Canada and in different spaces, I've also strived to be as inclusive as I can of others, because having walked through some doors, I'm trying to do what I can to hold the door open for others. And one of the movements, let's say, that I've come across is what they call I'm Remarkable movement that was started internally in Google. So Google back in, I think, 2016, wanted to be more inclusive of women because they felt women were underrepresented and that sort of stuff. And, Google wants to make sure that they're bringing more voices, because as they bring more voices, they become a better company and add more value to society. And as they started that, they realized, oh, women are not the only underrepresented group.
Mm.
There are other underrepresented group, and by the same diversity mantra, right there, whether it's by gender, by race, by ethnicity, by sexual orientation, etc. So they built that movement within Google to make sure people felt good about self-promotion, because what it is, you want to make sure people can express themselves, because people have a lot of creativity, a lot of great ideas, but society sometimes don't let them speak based on how they look and what representation they have in terms of diversity. So this is where that movement came about. And I was looking at the stats, and I think there are over 500,000 people that have gone through that movement right now, because you have facilitators like myself that are going around and teaching people that, hey, your performance or your work is not going to speak for itself. You're going to have to share and say, hey, I can contribute in this way. I am able to provide some semblance of subject matter expertise in some spaces if I'm allowed to express myself. So it's a double way of saying, yes, you want to create that psychological safety where people can speak. However, you want to make them feel comfortable in speaking and encourage them to realize, hey, we do want to hear from you.
I think it's important that you highlight that you want people to know that you want to hear them. And I think that's a key. Is that one of the, when you talk about the marvelous wow, which I think is a term, I don't know if that's a term you came up with. I think it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay. So what does that mean? Is what you've just talked about tied into marvelous wow?
Yeah, because I look at it I look at wow as actually it's I kind of stole it from agile, right? Ways of working, right?
Yeah.
So everybody has their own way of working.
Right.
I think I more heard it through PMI when they were talking about distributed agile in terms of your ways of working, and the way distributed disciplined agile, sorry, I should say disciplined agile work is that you're getting teams to work in the ways that make best sense for them and that situation.
Right.
You're not trying to impose on them, say, hey, you need to work in this way and this. So you're looking at them and saying, hey, based on the skill set that you have and based on what you're looking to deliver, what's the way of working that should be applied to make sure that we can deliver effectively based on what the customer requires. So that's where I came on to say, yeah, if people are allowed to express themselves and work, in the way that best suits them, then we will have a marvelous result. So that's where I came up with marvelous wow.
I like it. I think I know you're Lean Six Sigma trained. You're obviously a strong agile, I think, in Scrum leader, and you've been certified in those areas as well. And then of course you're highly active in your community, right? I think you sit on boards of the region Alliance
York
of the
Region
African
Alliance of
Canadian.
African
Yeah.
Canadian Communities. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this all come together for you? Because I mean, obviously you're somebody who's you've got a PhD, and so has that provided you an opportunity, a platform? Like how does this come together for you?
Yeah,
In
yeah. So I like to give a little bit of the context and background so that people understand where I'm coming
Please.
from and how I got to this. So back in 2004, I was driving my daughter to daycare. She was about 4 years old at the time. And she said, Daddy, you know that the white kids get best treatment in daycare? So at
Wow.
four, right, at
Yeah.
four, I realized that she was always already picking up some of the, whether it be conscious or unconscious bias that's out there, that she was feeling it and observing it in just the way that she was being treated when she was in daycare. So that made me realize that there's something there in the society that we need to address. And as I got the opportunity, because it's something that was always knocking around in my head, and I believed her, and however, I didn't have the facts or you know all of that to be able to articulate it very well. So that's why when I had the opportunity to do my doctoral study, I said, what, I'm going to really investigate what she was saying to me, a few years, 10, 11 years prior. I wanted to make sure that I understood where it's coming from and how I could contribute to making things better. So
Mm,
that's why I started my doctoral journey and wanted to understand what are the background, and that's where I first came across Employment Equity Act and understanding a little bit more of the context in terms of Canada and how they've tried, basically, let's call it continuous improvement, right? They've
mm,
really made efforts along the way in terms of enacting laws and enforcing laws to see how they can make the society better. But unfortunately, it's going against centuries of certain hierarchies, certain
yeah.
uh, systemic structures that are in place. So, unfortunately, people say that we had 400 years of slavery, but it's only been like a few decades that we've had certain improvements. So, for example, I mentioned the Immigration Act being modified in 1967. I mean, that's just, five
Yeah.
decades ago,
Yeah.
right?
It's not that
So
long
it's
ago. No,
not that long
absolutely.
ago. And then when I look at the integration, so part of the work that we do in the York region with York Region Alliance of African Canadian Communities is just have conversations with organizations like the different school boards that are within York Region Police, the York Region CAS, because there's been, unfortunately, overrepresentation of the Black community in a negative way when it comes to
Mm,
expulsions and discipline and that sort of stuff, and overrepresentation within in child welfare, right?
mhm,
So is how do we change the trajectory of some of our communities so that they can, as I say, they can take the escalator to success as opposed to the pipeline to prison. Because you
mm.
may have heard that term
Yes.
mentioned. So it's trying to, again, along the lines of continuous improvement. How can we continue to improve the relationship and how people are perceived, how they perceive themselves, so that we can uh, create a more equitable society. And again, I think it's a situation where if everybody wins, then the whole society wins.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Everybody wins when society wins when that happens. Here's As I was listening to you, again, I think I have a different outlook than some
Mm,
on life in general, right?
mm,
And I believe we need to embrace the paradigm shift, right? I think rules and mandates and government legislation is good, but it's not the answer, in my opinion. I'm gonna
mm,
ask you for your feedback on my thoughts here,
mm,
but when you don't need those if you have a shift in paradigm about how you see people and how
mm,
you relate to people and how
mm,
you value people.
mm,
If you value people in the right way, you don't need those rules. You don't need those legislations. You don't need that because it's part of who you are as a person and how you interact with those around you.
yes. No, I agree with you. I mean, it should not be necessary to have government come in and say, hey, we should put this law in place. But I go back to the whole thought of, you know, if we take ourselves to look at maybe another industry, say the car industry, there was a time where people didn't wear seatbelts. Seatbelts weren't
Right.
around, right? And unfortunately, people got into accidents and either were seriously hurt or died, unfortunately. And then someone invented the seatbelt. I think it was a scientist at Volvo. And then eventually, but you had to change regulation.